Just began.
All right. It's 5 o'clock, Council. Time to get down to work. Today, we acknowledge that this event is taking place on the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Ojibwe peoples, and on lands connected with the Lake Simcoe and Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818. This is the home of a diverse range of Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. And today, Council, we have our voting cards. So we've got our yes, no, and request to speak cards. So if you don't have them, then I will poll your vote. I guess at the. Well, I don't know if it matters if that's the outset of the end, but we'll play that as we figure that out as we go along, and maybe I'll look for some guidance from the clerk. So first up, we have the motion to adopt the agenda. And the motion is moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor McLeod. Be it resolved that the content of the council agenda and addendum for April 27, 2020 be adopted as presented. Unless there's any comments or questions, I will call the vote then. All in favor? Now, I'll take your hand for that, Councillor Doherty. Okay, so that is carried unanimously. Declarations of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Does anyone have a declaration of pecuniary interest today? Seeing none, if you find yourself in that position as we progress, please raise your hand and let us know the general nature thereof. Adoption of the minutes. Item 4.1. The motion is moved by Councillor McLeod and seconded by Councillor Madigan. Be it resolved that the minutes of the regular meeting of council held April 20, 2020 be approved as presented. Are there any errors or omissions, Council, before I call the vote? Councillor McLeod. Councillor, you have to unmute. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Great. So in the minutes under item number 3, it's a very small point. The phrase used is employed at the hospital with regard to Councillor Berman stepping out of the room and or stepping away. And I believe that was not where they worked. It's so small, I know, but.
Yeah, I'll look to the clerk as financial support Collingwood General Marine Hospital and recused himself from voting as family members are employed at the proposed site. This is what I see there. So
that's been changed before I got to it then, or before we got here. Thank you.
All right.
Perfect.
Thanks for the heads up.
Thank you.
Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Worship. Under the Corporate and Community Service Standing Committee report, I had pulled item 10.1.3, the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan, and I had added comments, number 1, adding that transportation be added to the items considered under social development, and secondly, asking whether the province would be providing funding to the municipalities and or the county for implementation of this plan since these services were a download of provincial responsibilities.
Clerk, do you note those changes? Yeah.
Certainly, Your Worship. I will review them. And again, if it was only comment and it wasn't a motion regarding it, it wouldn't be necessarily reflected in the minutes, but we'll take a look at that.
Good, thank you. All right, are there any other questions or comments before I call the vote? All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Any business arising from the previous minutes, Council? Seeing none, we'll go right into community announcements, and we'll start with you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson.
This is, I believe, the second Monday that we've met, where the weather has been quite beautiful. Sun is shining outside. And I know that we're all looking forward to better days ahead and spending time outside, freely moving about. That said, I'd just like to take a moment to reflect backwards, if I may, on the season that has passed, and I'm specifically referring to hockey. And I do apologize. I'm having a sense of Groundhog Day. So if I go down this path, and I've mentioned it before, someone else has already at the table, please cut me off at that path. But I wanted to just mention, I was thinking that, for example, CCI, the high school tomorrow was supposed to be leaving tomorrow for their trip to head out east for Halifax, New York, and Boston. And it was part of their music program, something that they do every year. And I know there were a number of kids that were looking forward to that and won't have that opportunity. And it's a segue into the fact that I just wanted to draw to people's attention that it's no secret that Collingwood has a long-standing tradition as it relates to hockey, particularly junior and minor hockey in this community. And this year we had 3 teams within Collingwood minor hockey, the Adam BB team, the Adam AE3 team, and the Pee Wee AE3 team that had made it through their playdowns and were headed to their respective OMHA, Ontario Minor Hockey Association, championships. And I've been very fortunate in various capacities through my 2 boys to have gone down that route 6 times in the past. And I know how much it means to these kids. I know how hard they work. And to get to your championship, to get to your quote unquote Stanley Cup and have your season end was very disappointing for these youth. I think that the OMHA did the right thing, and they have opted to award co-championship to each of their respective divisions. So in Collingwood this year, we have co-champions at the Adam BB, Adam AE3, and the Pee Wee AE3 level. And I think that that's worth noting, and just a shout out to those 3. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention that our Collingwood Lightning hockey program, which is, I think, just finishing its 3rd year, continues to grow, continues to flourish. Their respective Pee Wee BB team made it to the provincial championship. They have a slightly different format, and their team was 49-6 in the regular season. Played through a qualifier, and they were to have played at a tournament in the GTA April 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this would have been, I believe, a first for Collingwood. And so again, a huge shout out to the Collingwood Lightning Pee Wee BB team giver. And I love that name. So anyway, congratulations to those teams and to all our youth who had a fantastic season in their respective leagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor McLeod.
Thank you so much. I actually would like to thank whichever councillor it was who told us last week about a thing called Collingwood Commons, because I, in my quarantining, am working hard on a very solid COVID-19 weight gain. And so I have managed to eat from several of the places that have been advertising on Collingwood Commons, and a couple of whom I believe only really sell at the Collingwood Farmers Market. And so I was very excited about some of the offerings. And so I will continue to work on my COVID-19. Thank you.
Very good. Councillor Comey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was nice the Deputy Mayor touched on youth and sport, because what was on my mind, there's always chaos happening in my house behind me. I think our youth are doing fantastic in our community. We know that we are so fortunate to have a community filled with such talented youth from one end of the spectrum to the other, from the arts to sport to community. And from what I'm seeing, our youth are doing wonderfully during this time. They are helping to sew masks. They are thinking outside of the box when it comes to PPE support, and they're painting rocks and leaving them around the trails. And I think overall, generally being pretty good. So last I saw, I think we heard school, it's till the end of May, and then we don't know. But to all the parents hanging in there with the really wee ones who can't get to story time or the playground, I think our families and our youth are doing fantastic. And we owe a great big thank you to them for really hanging tough with all the special requirements. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Madigan.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson, and thank you very much, Councillor McLeod, for making me laugh once again. You're humorous lady, and thanks for working on your COVID-19 ad weight. That's fantastic. And Keith, thanks for telling us about Collingwood Commons. That was great, and it was good to see a local entrepreneur helping out our community. My community announcement is going to come through me to the council through a 10-year-old little girl that lives down the road from me. She came to my house, knocked on my door, and told me last Friday that the fire department was going to come down the street and just to add support to the frontline workers. But was more important for her to tell me and tell every other house on the road, without her even knowing who I was. She was so impressed with our CAO, Freedom In, that she sent him an email last Sunday at 4:23, and he responded at 4:59 on a Sunday. And she thought that was the greatest thing in the world. So thank you, Mr. Mann, and thank you, our fire chief, for the continued support of the frontline workers here in Collingwood and all over Ontario. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Madigan. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Your Worship. In these days of improving weather and very few opportunities for us to get outdoors, one of those few remaining opportunities is the use of our town trails and the Georgian Trail. But I will just sort of extend these little reminders to folks who are using the trails in a socially distanced way. And that is, number one, that pedestrians always have the right of way. Number two, that cyclists need to stay right and to the right, signal when they are passing other cyclists or pedestrians, either by voice or by bell, and be cognizant of their speed, because of course cyclists move a lot faster than pedestrians do. And finally, if you have your dog on a trail, remember to pick up after that dog and keep that dog on a leash. Secondly, there's a national movement to make Wednesdays, takeout Wednesdays, to support our local restaurants. And so I hope that we can make that a regular event here in the town of Collingwood. So skip the dishes, go out, find your favorite restaurant, either because you know where it is or because you can find it on Collingwood Common, and order this coming Wednesday night. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Doherty. Councillor Berman. No request to speak. Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Just one thing this evening, I want to comment on the Professional Accountants of Ontario announced the launch of its Accounting for Bravery on April 13th. So this permits healthcare workers on the front lines to have their returns prepared for free by accountants in Ontario. There's many firms involved in that. And it is in an effort to help as many frontline workers as possible. And they're going to cover simple individual, spousal, and dependent children's tax returns for those frontline workers in hospitals or nursing homes. And it includes, but is not limited to, nurses, paramedics, doctors, cleaning staff, PSWs, lab technicians, or other healthcare professionals who are dealing directly with COVID-19. So worth noting, if you know any of those frontline workers, to remind them that they can save a few costs this year and have them done for free.
That's a great tribute. Thank you. Councillor Hamlin.
Yes, I just have one thing. A number of our residents have been working at the provincial level to get allotment and community gardens onto the essential services list. And on Saturday, the province announced that allotment and community gardens would be allowed to be open this year after all. The use of those, of course, is an essential source of food for not only individuals, but families in our community. The province has also said that our local medical officers of health will set the rules around the operation of those allotment and community gardens, including things like safe physical distancing and disinfecting of equipment. So for those who didn't know, this is going to be a Go year. Go grow. Yes, thank you.
That's a good day to start.
Mm.
I will just echo Councillor Doherty's comment about ordering out on Wednesdays, take out on Wednesdays, so that we can support our local restaurants. And as well through Collingwood Commons, you can shop online with our local stores too, so they can keep their businesses active during this period of shutdown. And again, we all pay tribute to our frontline workers, whether they be in the healthcare sector, the long-term care sector, or in our grocery stores and essential services. They are certainly doing a great job to keep us fed and healthy. And with that, we will move on to the next item on the agenda. We don't have any public meetings, no deputations, so we have the consent agenda, and it is moved by Councillor Comey and seconded by Councillor Doherty. Be it resolved that the general consent agenda, having been given due consideration by council, be received. 8.1 letter, Sunset Point restoration from Ted Rose Sr., and 8.2 Town of Oakville further support for small businesses, and there is a motion prepared on that item. So first we'll vote to pass it, the consent agenda, and then if you want to pull an item, we will pull it subsequent. So all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Are there any items to be pulled, council? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to pull 8.1.
Okay. Any other items, council? We do have a motion for 8.2. So, but we'll start with 8.1. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. I asked for this item to be pulled because Mr. Rowe's letter summarizes, I think, a lot of the concerns that residents have who have realized that Sunset Point Park is slowly falling into Georgian Bay. I know Director Culver and his team have been working hard on trying to save our park and get restoration work underway for a number of months. And I was wondering if, through you, Mr. Mayor, we could have an update from Director Culver at this point.
Yes, we'll look to Dean, but I can advise that I had corresponded directly with Chief Annaquat of the Saugeen First Nations. That went out last Monday, and we got a response on Tuesday. So we're hopeful that the Saugeen Nations will be in a position to respond to our request for comment, and then it will be back to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. And I'll pass that over to Director Culver.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, so I think that advancement of some of the communication that I've had in the past with council, in addition to the challenges in getting responses from the MNRF during the COVID pandemic, we also have became aware that they are viewing March 30th as the end of the First Nations consultation period. And unfortunately, the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation Environment Office was closed on March 13th. So that effectively leaves us with 17 days left in that consultation period. So what the mayor was referring to is an effort that he's made to help expedite response from the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. Chief Annaquat did respond and indicated that he would be in touch with Chief Najawan of the Nawash Nation as well, who are also involved in the review. And hopefully, and he also included the lead person from the Environment Office at the Saugeen First Nation. So we're hopeful that we'll see a response from them delivered to the MNRF, and the MNRF hopefully will see that as the last box that needs to be checked before we can proceed with work. We have a contractor secured. We have an engineer working on a re-review of the shoreline in light of the recent storms to ensure that we're directing the work in a priority way to areas that need it the most. And that's where we're at. That's the status right now.
That's right. Follow up?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, my concern is that the Minister of Natural Resources and their staff won't give this the priority it needs. And I'm so concerned that something that council, I think, has considered an emergency for a long time is just flailing at the provincial level. And I do appreciate the need to get the consent of our partners, as explained by Director Culver. But I'm wondering at our municipality if someone will be able to take a proactive approach and get someone at the minister's office to take on this file and take ownership of it and help us drive through to successful conclusion.
We're certainly hoping, and I think Director Culver has his hand up, so I'll go to Dean.
Yeah, further to what I've already said, Executive Director Skinner has also provided us with some contacts at the Ministry of Natural Resources, and it's helping us to make some contacts there. So we're having a bit more of a direct conversation. One of the questions is about how we view it as a priority and why it is an emergency in our eyes. So we're following through on that as well.
I guess it should also be said that we are now at record high levels of water, which have put increasing stress on the shoreline, as well as the heavy winds that we've been experiencing. So unfortunately, it's been a perfect storm, so to speak, in terms of the environmental aspects of it, but we are certainly going to do everything we can to protect our shoreline. Thank you, Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you.
So item 8.2, we do have a motion prepared. I'm not sure, in light of the recent announcement from the federal government about the commercial lease loans and contribution program through the federal government, that any further action is necessary. But if any council member would like to pull the item, we do have a motion prepared. Seeing none, we'll take that as a no. And that moving on from the consent agenda, then next item, reports of minutes of other committees. We have none. Standing committee reports. 10.1 Development and Operations Services, March 9, 2020 meeting. And the first resolution, which is moved by Councillor Doherty, who is chairing that committee, and seconded by Councillor Hamlin, who is vice chair. Be it resolved that council receive the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee report from its meeting held March 9, 2020, and hereby approve the recommendations contained within the report as presented. 10.1.1 PW 2020-6 Drainage Easement, 39 Glen Rogers Road. 10.1.3 Development and AMP Operations Services Standing Committee Consent Agenda received. 10.1.4 Architectural Conservancy Ontario BIA membership on the CHAC, and 10.1.5 Economic Development Action Plan overview and update. And you recall, as pursuant to our current operations or procedure, when we if we pass it with all items without pulling any item, those items are adopted. So if anybody has an item that they wish to pull for anything more than a comment, so for a change or to be re-looked at, now is your opportunity. Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Your Worship. Within the consent agenda from that meeting, which was held on March 9th, there was a resolution from the County of Haliburton, which was directed to the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture and the Ministry of Transportation, opposing and asking for reconsideration of the doubling of fees for the TODS signage or highway signage in 2020. Now that original resolution was dated February. Our meeting was held actually in advance of the statement or the declaration of emergency by the county and by the province. And so no further action was recommended. However, since that time, with the province being in shutdown and all small businesses, all businesses being in shutdown, it is very evident that a doubling of these fees would be an undue hardship on our businesses on top of everything else that they have had to put up with. And so I am asking that we could relook at that resolution from the County of Haliburton and support it.
Certainly, and I've got a prepared motion. So we'll pull that item and then we'll vote on all of the items with the exception of that item from the consent agenda, which was item 10.1.3. So we'll pull that one item from the consent agenda and move forward with the vote on the balance of the items. That being said, then I will call the vote on receiving the report. All in favor? And that is carried. So Councillor Doherty, why don't I read what has been prepared and you can provide whatever comments you'd like. So it's moved by Councillor Doherty and seconded by Councillor Hamlin. Whereas the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee received the correspondence from Haliburton County prior to the COVID-19 declaration of emergency. And whereas the Ministry of Heritage, Sport, Tourism and Culture and the Ministry of Transportation supervise the delivery and maintenance of tourism-oriented destination signage through a third-party Canadian TODS Limited. And whereas our tourism stakeholders and other enterprises rely heavily on this signage to direct customers to their businesses. And whereas Canadian TODS Limited recently advised their customers that fees will be doubling beginning in 2020, which will result in significant financial hardship for those business owners, in addition to the hardships as a result of COVID-19. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the Council of the Town of Collingwood support Haliburton County in its resolution to request the Ministry of Tourism, Culture and Sport and the Ministry of Transportation reconsider or phase in this fee increase, allowing appropriate amount of time for businesses to adjust. Councillor Doherty, do you have any further comments before I canvass council?
No, I think the resolution and my comments speak for themselves. Thank you.
Council, any questions or comments before I call the vote on this? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. So I think we're into motions now then. And that first item is 12.1. This is a motion moved by Councillor Comey and seconded by Councillor Doherty. Be it resolved that council hereby authorize the change in meeting time for regular meetings of council and standing committees to a daytime hour of 1:30 p.m. for the duration of the declaration of emergency or as otherwise recommended by the CAO. Councillor, are there any questions or comments before I call the vote? Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I guess I was originally thinking that this was just for council meetings, and during this time, I think 1:30 is probably reasonable, but to have every committee meeting, I'm one of the few on council who still has to work throughout this, and to fill a week with a committee and a standing committee and or a combination thereof would really impede my ability to work. But with that said, I was willing to accommodate at least the council meeting for 1:30. And then my other comment would be that I would want it strictly only for while the provincial declaration of emergency is ongoing. This would not interest me in the least going beyond having to accommodate during COVID-19.
All right. Well, are you putting any amendment or changes on the table, or how would you like to deal with this?
Well, I think my only way to deal, I guess, I could amend to remove and standing committees.
Your worship?
Yes. Clerk,
The
please go ahead.
the motion could be severed.
Okay, so we could sever it into constituent parts, which would be that the change the time for regular meetings of council for the duration of the declaration of emergency or as otherwise recommended by the CAO, and then you could vote on that, and then I guess have the standing committees as a separate item. Although I don't know if that addresses both your concerns, Councillor Jeffrey.
No, I guess the other, well, I guess if we severed them, well, I can vote against one and vote for the other, I guess. But I also want it that it's strictly just as the declaration of emergency, which might also mean removing or as otherwise recommended by the CAO.
Right. So let me, there's other comments around the table. So before I find a seconder for your amendments, then I will look to the Deputy Mayor, and then I also have you, Councillor Doherty.
Thank you. I don't in principle have an issue with this. I just want to be sure, and perhaps through you to the two who have tabled the motion or through to the CAO for comment. And that is that I think that we could all acknowledge that even in the best of circumstances, when we have a meeting at 5 o'clock, we tend to have communication going back and forth right up until 5 o'clock. And my concern is that if the meeting is on a Monday and we're pulling it forward in the day, does staff have appropriate time to be responding to concerns, questions, comments from the 9 of us, let alone all of the other factors that go into ensuring a proper meeting? And the other part that I just want to be very mindful, and I realize that the request is simply through the state of emergency, but I want to be sure that our staff who are working, and I'm referring to all, that you know, by pushing this forward in the day, I don't want to see that all of a sudden that we're now interrupting them on a Sunday for comment or feedback to specific questions from the agenda that comes out prior to the weekend. So maybe if we can just get some comment as to the intent, that would be appreciated.
I think I'll start with the CAO, and then I will look to the mover, Councillor Comey, for the intent. But just start off from the staff issues response to the Deputy Mayor's questions.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't think we will have any concerns if it relates to just council meetings, and that if it is restricted to the emergency. I don't think we would have any concerns if the discretionary provision is removed, and that we restrict it to the state of emergency. The issue raised by the Deputy Mayor, I think, are quite valid in that if the meeting is held later, it gives us an opportunity to interact with staff, with council, and answer the questions in a more fulsome way prior to the meeting occurring. But you know, I think we're prepared to support this because we're dealing with an exceptional circumstances, and we're prepared to do the extra work to get councillors ready if that's what's required for 1:30 during the provincial emergency.
Thank you. Councillor Comey?
Thanks, Mayor Saunderson. So I suppose through you to the Deputy Mayor, I believe Clerk Almas was good enough to circulate this to both CAO admin and staff. And the intent was really to ease potentially the burden on staff taking this call at 5 o'clock from home, potentially juggling their own household needs, childcare needs through the supper hour, potential elder care needs. I'm a perfect sandwich where I have work, I have my parents living here, I have my children. So the thought was to have a meeting, as we did last week, that started at 5 and went till 11, might certainly be placing a super great burden on our staff to be on the line at that time. So I thank the clerk so much for helping me with the wording that clearly states it's just through the declaration of emergency. I had suggested to the clerk we have the wording at the CAO's discretion because there could be a number of other variables that come up as the province continues to roll out regulations that potentially make it more beneficial to staff to have it at this hour. But I appreciate your comments, and the intent was certainly simply to alleviate any undue burden on staff taking this particular situation at home on a call through these hours. Thank you.
Does that assist, Deputy Mayor? Any follow-up?
It does. Thank you. As long as our staff are comfortable with this and we do this for the balance of the emergency, then I'm fine with it. I mean, the reality is that this is not a perfect scenario for anyone, but what we're dealing with is an extraordinary time. And so that's fine. I appreciate the motion coming forward and happy to support it.
Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Worship. My comments were really going to be a combination of those of Councillor Jeffrey and of Deputy Mayor, in that I was concerned about staff's ability to answer questions, last minute business that tends to come up in advance of these meetings, and by moving it up to 1:30, whether that was possible. And I also felt very strongly that this should only, if we do approve this, it should only take place for the duration of this declaration of emergency and not beyond. And so I would be likely to recommend that we would take out the last condition, otherwise recommended by the CAO.
Okay, we're going to leave that because Councillor Jeffrey had raised that issue, so I will go back to her for the amendment in due time. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. I just wanted to also remind council that a number of months ago that we agreed, and staff has been kind enough to accommodate, we do receive our agenda package a full day earlier than we used to, specifically to allow council an extra day to speak to staff. And so I'm really hoping that losing a few hours before a council meeting won't prove to be a new hardship. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from council? Seeing none, then I'll go back to you, Councillor Jeffrey. You had some amendments you wanted to put on the floor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. So I think by severing the two as suggested by the clerk, and then just removing as otherwise recommended by the CAO off of, I guess I have to do those one at a time. So for now, it's just severing them, and then off the first one, removing as otherwise recommended by the CAO, because I just don't know what all that entails. And for the public, I don't think we want to be bumping around the times too many times.
Okay, severing you're entitled to do as of right, so we don't need to call a motion on that. So then we've got first up then, and let me read it to you and you tell me if this is capturing what you intend. The council hereby authorize the change in meeting time for regular meetings of council to a daytime hour of 1:30 p.m. for the duration of the declaration of emergency. All right. So can I get a seconder for that, please?
Sorry.
So clerk, go ahead.
Sorry, just for procedure process, it might be best to deal with the amendment first on both of them. So the amendment being as otherwise recommended by the CAO, removing that, council vote on that, and then we can go into the two separate items.
Okay. So then just for the removal of the words or as otherwise recommended by the CAO, that's been moved by Councillor Jeffrey. Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Berman. Oh, Councillor McLeod's holding up a sign. She's lost her audio connection. Did you wish to speak to this motion, Councillor McLeod? Okay, we'll just hang in while Councillor McLeod reconnects. I don't know. While Councillor McLeod is reconnecting, if anyone has to take a bio break, now would be a good time to do that. Or just stand up.
No bio break if you're fasting.
So I'm getting the update from our IT, and they are working on it as much as they can. Oh, it looks like you might be connected now. You're good. Okay.
One more to go.
Mayor Saunderson.
Yes. Go ahead.
Respectfully, if we were in the chambers, a member could walk away for a moment. Could we not continue? Or are we still waiting for Councillor McLeod?
Well, I think Councillor McLeod's back. I guess I'm waiting because I gave council a recess.
Fair enough.
So I'm reluctant to proceed without Councillor Madigan. We'll give him a couple more minutes. Are you able to hear Councillor McLeod? No? It seems we still have some technical issues. Councillor Madigan.
Am I there now?
Yes, yep, good, perfect timing. All right, so we have a motion on the floor to remove, it's moved by Councillor Jeffrey, seconded by Councillor Berman, and it's to remove the words "or as otherwise recommended by the CAO" from the motion that's before us. So unless there's any other comments or questions, I will call the vote. All in favor of the amendment to remove those words? And hold them up. Keep them up, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that is carried. 7, that is carried. And now we have the motion that's been severed. So the first motion is that council hereby authorize the change in meeting time for regular meetings of council to a daytime hour of 1:30 p.m. for the duration of the declaration of emergency. And unless there's any other questions or comments, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And the second part of the motion, the council hereby authorize the change in meeting time for standing committees to a daytime hour of 1:30 p.m. for the duration of the declaration of the emergency. Any other questions or comments before I call the vote? All in favor? And opposed? So noted, and that is carried. (12.2). This is a notice of motion moved by Councillor Hamlin and seconded by Councillor Berman. Whereas council approved resolution number 2020-78 to review the 2020 budget for projects that may not occur in 2020 or where other efficiencies or cost savings may be identified that could be reallocated to the emergency contingency fund for COVID-19 to offset the funds needed from the sale of asset proceeds. Be it resolved, the council authorized the 2020 budget review to be expanded to include that any cost savings or efficiencies identified not be limited to just offsetting the funds being used from the asset sale proceeds, but to also offset other losses across the corporation that were unexpected as a result of the COVID-19 crisis to ensure a balanced budget. And further, the council requests staff to report back at the next SIC meeting regarding the status of the review and the anticipated timeline. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Hamlin, do you want to speak to this before I call the vote? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the motion's self-evident and just speaks to my desire to have council involved always on the financial implications of COVID in our municipality. And I'm looking forward to the report from staff at our next SIC meeting if this motion is passed. Thank you.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Just a couple of questions, probably through to the CAO. My first is this something we would do in the normal course in any event? And then my second question is the timing reasonable given everything that else we have on the go for staff?
CAO.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Councillor Jeffrey. I agree. I mean, I think this is something that we would normally do during the course of our review of the budget. Not only will we look at simply the support to businesses and organizations outside of the municipality, but we'll also look at within and how we might be able to deal with some of the revenue losses or some additional costs that might be associated with COVID-19. One of the things that I spoke about last time we met was the issue around a return to work protocol that is being developed by the executive director. And part of that might include some retrofitting of our facilities to make sure that we're more prepared to deal with the kind of virus that COVID-19 is, which is to minimize the touching of surfaces and all that sort of stuff. So I would suspect that some of that information will be included when we bring forward the assessment of the impact of COVID-19 on the municipal budget, not only due to external circumstances, but actually within the corporation and how we can use some of the funds that have been set aside to deal with some of the fiscal challenges that we might have within the corporation as well. On the issue of timing, I guess it would be my strong recommendation that the full impact may not be known until, I would suggest, the earliest would be sometime in June. And at that time, I suspect staff will be able to bring forward a more comprehensive assessment of the impact of COVID-19 on our budget, both on the revenue side, but also on the expenditure side. I also communicated to council that I think it would be the intent of staff to bring forward an update at SIC or council meeting, but the actual deliberation of the entire budget in its totality, I think we would need at least sometime until June to be able to bring forward that assessment. So that's a long-winded way of saying it depends on when the SIC is. If the SIC is sometime, in the next couple of weeks, I think an update would be in order, but I don't think staff will be ready with a more comprehensive assessment of the impact of COVID-19 on our budget.
Is there any follow-up, Councillor Jeffrey?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Saunderson. Yeah, I believe our next SIC is scheduled for the first week of May. So I also know that what I was going to report on under other business was FCM's request of the federal government with respect to emergency operating funding for municipalities. So I think there's a few other things that are going to be able to come into the mix and that are going to impact our assessment of our budget and avoiding a deficit in those kinds of discussions. So while I don't disagree with with Councillor Hammond's suggestion that we will need this information eventually, I'm just not sure it's reasonable for May 5th because we just will not have all of the aspects that we need.
Yeah, the meeting I think is May 6th, but so I'm going to look to Councillor Hamlin because the last sentence, just for clarification, if you could please, it says, and further that council requests staff to report back at the next SIC meeting, which would be March 6th, regarding the status of the review and anticipated timeline. So I'm not sure you were expecting a report back on May 6th. What you were looking for is a timeline for the nuts and bolts of this motion to be carried out and brought back to the SIC in a more fulsome way. Would that be correct?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's right. I think, my sense is, well, let me put it this way. I feel that unlike other municipalities that I'm reading about, if I can put it that way, or talking to people about, that we have no information as a council on what the impact financially that this, disaster is having on us. I know at our last meeting, our treasurer was kind enough to indicate she thought it was costing $36,000 a month. Or a week, pardon me, 36,000 a week. I know by June we'll be 6 months into our year. In fact, we won't have a full update on the impact of this. God knows it'll be December, really. We can only do what we, with what we have. But I am just always concerned that if we should be making changes to what's in our budget, we shouldn't be waiting, I'll just throw it there, to December, because we're going to be quite a bit in the hole by then. So all I'm looking for is at the earliest possible date, some indication of where we are in our budget and whether we should be making changes now. And I know a line-by-line review of the budget is a big deal, and I can understand it could be June. But I can't believe that by May 6th, or let me put it this way, I would be hopeful by May 6th, we could have some review of where we are financially and some suggestions on how we're going to be balancing the budget. Thank you.
CAO Min.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I think that request is not unreasonable. I mean, my comments were meant to address the more comprehensive review, but I think it was always our intent to bring forward rolling update on what's happening on the budgetary side. And if the expectation is that we'll come to SIC on May the 5th with a more detailed timeline, a critical path, I think that's reasonable.
Good, thank you. Any other questions? Yep, Councillor Madigan. Got you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. And I can appreciate where Councillor Hamlin is coming from, but I can also appreciate the hardships that a very small accounting department in the town is doing. So through you to Director Leonard, let's ask her if this is possible. At what early state is this possible at? Because we also have the tax rates being passed as June 30th. So these are things that we should all know. Thank you.
Director Leonard.
Your Worship, I don't see Director Leonard on the call. I'm not sure why, but I don't see her listed as a participant.
All right, well, or maybe clerk, if someone could reach out to Director Leonard, and I'll go to the Deputy Mayor's question, and we can patch her in when we've got her online. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. It's more of a comment. I think that the motion is good, that has been tabled by Councillor Hamlin and Councillor Berman, and prepared to support it. I just wanted to make one comment to the public who may be watching and our residents, and that is that I think that they need to be assured. We do have a sense of what's happening. Those who have been following along and see your daily updates and the press, et cetera, are fully aware that our staff have put capital projects on hold, have already made decisions to stop in-track, for example, until some of the data is more readily available and is concrete, so that we can make better decisions moving forward. So I want people to be assured that it's not business as usual, and that until we can make very good decisions as it relates to going back through the 2020 budget, we've really, for all intents and purposes, put things on hold from a spending standpoint. And I think that needs to be reiterated.
Thank you. Do we have Marjorie? Director Leonard, are you on board here?
Sorry, through your worship, we're trying to connect.
All right, well, in the absence of Marjorie, I think we'll move forward. Before I call the vote, though, I just would like to pick up on the threads both of Councillor Jeffrey and of the Deputy Mayor. I think staff have been working extremely hard. There's been a lot of stresses at Town Hall, obviously, with trying to waive the penalties for our water and wastewater rates, as well as the taxes, property taxes, and processing applications for that. We have been very involved with the FCM through Councillor Jeffrey with our burn rate going out. And so I think there's a lot of activity, and as Councillor Jeffrey and others on council have noted, as these different programs come down from the federal and provincial government, the landscape changes on almost a daily basis. So being able to put your finger on some impacts is really not feasible at this point in time until we have that information. But having said all that, I will support the motion because I think more information. Having more information is better, and certainly we want to make sure that we have the best information in hand as we make decisions going forward. And this is a very fluid situation. I now know we have Treasurer Leonard on hand, so I'll look to Marjorie, to maybe Councillor Madigan. I'll get you to reiterate your questions so that Marjorie understands what's the questions.
Thank you very much, Mayor Saunderson. And once again, I just want to say the motion is a good motion, but I think timeline is just pushing a little bit because we have a lot of things coming out. As the Deputy Mayor so eloquently said, this is not business as usual, but we also don't have a huge department that can maybe be dealing with this. So Ms. Leonard, through the Mayor to you, when can we get the best bang for the buck on information? When is the earliest that we could possibly get it?
Through you, your worship. For instance, at this point in time, we've just received the April 15th hydro bills. Those bills only cover up to March 13th. So I have no idea what type of an effect they will have if we carry forward into April. It's a similar thing with the bus, which is another large item that we have. We've cut down on the number of hours the bus is running. Again, I won't have those invoices to mid-May to come up with any of those types of analysis on it. We are a very small finance department with only 3 members, and we're looking at purchasing a budgeting software that would allow us to make forecasts a little quicker, but until we get that in, it's very difficult to make all of those predictions.
Thank you, Marjorie. And I think consistent with what the CAO said, we're looking into June to get really the harder numbers, but what we're looking for on the May 6th SIC meeting is just a timeline and the status of where we are in the progress of this review. And I think Councillor Hamlin clarified that for us. So I think the CA, what the treasurer is saying is that the CAO's timeline of June is a feasible one. So with that said, then I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. Bylaws. We have 13.1, the 2020 fees and services charges bylaw, the implementation date. So this is a resolution and a bylaw amendment dated April 24. So I think first off, what I have is that we waive the notice provisions as we addressed this item before, and this is an amendment just to clarify the language, and I'll look to the clerk just to explain that before I call the vote on this. Sarah?
Certainly, through your worship, to members of council. This staff report was included in the last agenda package in the SIC, and staff had noted in the amendment section that it was recommended that council consider establishing a revised implementation date from what was actually approved in March. And staff was remiss in bringing it to council's attention at the meeting last week. So we wanted to make sure that council had the ability to review that. The original date for enacting those fees and service charges changes was April 1st. And it was staff's recommendation to defer those increase in charges until July the 1st, with the exception of the one item which relates to the fire schedule that's noted in there, and that pertains to charges that we collect through insurance through the fire mark program.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'll put the motion to waive notice on the floor. It's moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor McLeod. Be it resolved that council herein waive notice provisions of the procedural bylaw to permit an amendment to bylaw 2020-15 to defer implementation of the new fees and services charges until July 1, 2020, as recommended for council's consideration in staff report T 2020-2. So I will call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. And then the motion itself, it's moved by Deputy Mayor Hall and seconded by Councillor McLeod. Be it resolved that bylaw number 2020-26 being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 2020-15 to defer the implementation date of the fees and services charges for 2020 to July 1, 2020 be enacted and passed this 27th day of April 2020. Excuse the clock. My wife told me it either goes in the garbage or I took it to the office, so it's here. And further, be it resolved that the amended implementation date not apply to the line item identified in section B1 fire department, emergency services described as fire department response fees, indemnification technology, and this service charge remain effective as of April 1, 2020. Any questions or comments before I call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Section 14, are there any notices of motion tonight? Seeing none, item 15 is county report. Mayor, I don't know, I know we have a meeting tomorrow, so maybe you want to hold off till next meeting or leave it up to you.
No, I don't. I mean, all of council is getting the updates. Our residents have an opportunity to get the county updates as well through simco.ca and the various portals. The only thing I would just maybe mention is that the week of April the 6th, I think it was, we started a week early with the yard waste collection. We had some issues. And last week, to the best of my knowledge, throughout the municipality, that issue was rectified and the yard waste was picked up on time properly. And for those who have commented or expressed interest in the reopening of the waste site at the 10th concession. That is on the agenda for tomorrow. And our communication department out of the county is excellent. And I would anticipate that whatever transpires out of tomorrow's conversation, that will make news at some point tomorrow. So those who are interested could keep an eye open for that. And of course, that'll be part of our county communique that's sent out regardless.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Any questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, we're into older deferred business. 6.1.1 COVID-19 pandemic municipal update. We heard today the Premier of Ontario talk about the phasing of lifting restrictions for our economy. 3 phases. The first one obviously is to protect and support, which is what we've been in for the last 6 weeks. Then there's the restart phase and the recover phase. And so the plan for the restart phase is to have it in 3 stages of opening with windows of 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how involved that phase is. And the province will be taking direction from the medical public health officials to see how we proceed, whether we continue forward or not. Certainly, the Premier and the Prime Minister have been very clear that until there is a vaccine or we get to the point where there's been a sufficient number of the population infected, that we will probably be going back and forth from the stage 1, protect and support, to the restart stage until we get through this pandemic, in which point we'll be going into the recovery phase. So we will be following the direction of the province here in Collingwood. We will be working with our business community and our residents on a phased in restart approach, making sure that we have input and we're following the direction of our medical health officers. We are certainly working in Town Hall. Executive Director Skinner has been working on a call to action or restart internally at Town Hall and protocols for putting that in place. And the CAO Min has already referenced some changes that may happen internally at Town Hall to protect our staff and the public who we are serving. So we will want to make sure that we are moving carefully, moving intentionally to protect the health and safety, not only of our residents, but also of our employees. And so that will be an ongoing process, and I know we're all looking forward to it. And we've heard announcements about the school closures staying on until the end of May. So it's a fluid situation, as it has been from the outset. We're looking forward to, well, we're working hard, I guess, on our reopening protocols to restarting the downtown core as permitted, and we will be working very hard with our residents, and that is part of the task force, some of the task force items that we've been looking at. Any questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, I'll get into 16.1.2, the Economic Support and Recovery Task Force. This task force now has been boots on the ground, I would say, for 2 weeks now. We have a very, very active and I think great brain trust and representation of the various sectors of our economy and business leaders. The group has divided itself into 7 subgroups, each mirroring an action item. And we've had 2 meetings of a full committee and 2 meetings of the subcommittees. And the action plan is evolving. And interestingly, we have looked at other regions and municipalities for their economic task forces. And the region of Halifax had a plan, or has a plan, that really mirrors, I think, what's come out of a province today. And it's divided into 3 phases. There's the urgent health crisis, which we are on the cusp of starting to emerge from. And the focus in that phase was to work on supporting local businesses through various initiatives and relief measures to help them through the shutdown period. Phase 2 is called the stabilization, which is really what we are calling restart in Ontario. And the 3rd phase is the recovery phase, when we're opening businesses and looking at ways that the municipality can assist and stimulate our local economy and our businesses across all sectors. So that's not just in the private sector, it's also in the public sector as well. So right now we are in the crisis, the urgent health crisis, and we're looking at emerging into the stabilization phases. And of the 7 action items, the first 2, we're really looking at immediate actions. So the first 2 immediate actions, we're looking at proper metrics, looking at what types of measurements we can use to measure the productivity of our economy when the COVID crisis started, how the COVID crisis has had immediate effects on those metrics, and then how we can measure our progress as we move forward. So working on that, there's been quite a sector looking at the various metrics that we might use. The second is to make sure that we're supporting our businesses through proper training and information. So we're working with our local businesses and residents to see what programs are available to them, what they do need to qualify, and to assist in doing that. We've held one webinar, and I know we're working on another. We're also looking at programs available for our social service sector, and Dean Culver has accumulated a group, put together a group of about 50 plus organizations. So we're looking to provide that same service to them, to how what programs they can take advantage of to serve their sectors. The next 3 action items are all phase 2 action items. So that is looking at the restart. So how the town can assist in marketing and promotional plans, coupon plans, ways to stimulate business, the simple shop, order out, takeout on Wednesdays is one example of things that we could might do and implement locally. And we're looking to leverage our local marketing expertise in partnership with other regional partners to do things like that. Action item 4 is looking at planning a series of events that we can do to get people out. And once social physical distancing rules are relaxed, ways to generate a buzz in the community and get people out and shopping. And as is item 5, looking at that same sort of idea of looking at ways that we can work with businesses to generate and stimulate the economy to get things going. Items 6 and 7 are longer term items, looking at ways that we can work to help businesses that might be looking at getting out of business, of selling, to find them new owners to keep businesses alive. Promoting existing businesses and through companies, growing companies. We know we're working on the business accelerator, and there has been a fair bit of overlap in our work on the economic development action plan, as well as the task force. So there's a fair degree of overlap, and looking longer term, we're looking at ways that we can leverage the work of the economic development action team to address specific COVID items. So the committee's been very hard at work, and the vice chair and the committee are looking to report to council on the SIC meeting on May 6th about the steps they've taken to date, items they have, action items they have planned, and their timeline for coming back to council with their full action plan. This coming Friday, we will be receiving presentations from 7 local business groups, as well as 11 social groups from the community sector, for a total of 18 presentations of between 15 and 20 minutes each, looking to get feedback from those groups about how their members have been affected and what action item they would have to put forward to the committee, the task force, for action moving forward. And are there any questions? Or well, I'll open it to the floor for the other committee members, Deputy Mayor, Councillor Jeffrey, and Councillor Doherty, if there's anything you'd like to add to that. And then we'll open the floor for questions. Okay, seeing no comments then, are there questions from council? Go ahead, Councillor Comey. Spacebar.
It didn't work. Spacebar didn't work. Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. That was a good update. So question for you, please, is, so I heard a couple of times the community groups come up. Are you partnering with the community organizations? Are they feeding in? Is there a synergy happening there? Is it becoming one big task force, or is there still
No, I think there's still a divide, but the economic task force isn't just addressing the private sector. We're looking at the public sector too. So we're interested in hearing from community groups about what they see as the gaps, the needs of their members, and what they think the town could do on an action item to address those issues. The committee or the virtual roundtable, the councillor, or the Director Culver and Jen Parker have assimilated, is a broader scope, I think, of that, looking at conversations with those groups to see what they're identifying in terms of needs. And I think one spin-off that has come from both groups is we're organizing now a group to look at matching PPE supply with PPE demand. So we know we've seen so many groups in our community come forward to making such things as hand sanitizer and face masks, face shields. There's other members that have thermometers, which are useful for screening at seniors' homes. So that we've linked that project with a local service group. And so I think it is a fairly fluid situation. There are spin-offs that are happening from the dynamic of both the task force and the roundtable. And so while I would say there's a lot of interaction, they are still separate.
Thank you so much.
Councillor Hammond.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that update. That was very helpful. I heard you say that the task force had supported a webinar, which I think is fantastic. I have talked to some businesses. I think some find it quite difficult to complete the applications for the so many programs that the federal government has put out, and it's hard to understand all the details for some people. And I also think that there's some concern that the landlords won't bother to apply for their relief and so on. So the suggestion, I just wanted to leave it with you to the extent that the task force thought it relevant or helpful, that we consider either retraining some of our staff, or if necessary, hiring, I hate to use that word during these times, but a person or two to help our business community complete these complex forms so that they can take advantage of the funding that's available. Thank you.
That's a great question and point, Councillor Hamlin. So we have staff supports, and we have Martin Ridlow from the Business Development Center, as well as Jillian Fairley involved. And a big part of Jillian Fairley's portfolio is doing that sort of thing, making sure that people have the proper information, and they are working to a great extent with some of our local businesses. And we have been hearing some good stories on the street level of people getting the correct information, getting their applications in, and starting to receive some funding. But you're absolutely right, the ground is shifting, and so it's a kind of a constantly revisiting and revising those as the programs get changed. But we are working very much and in that way. And the last discussion was about setting up a webinar to help some of our social sector employers get the information they need, because their programs are changing on a daily basis too. So we are very much alert to that, and we're working to that. And I think as needs dictate, we may certainly get into doing additional webinars for our residents and for our businesses and the social services. Any other questions, Council? Okay, seeing none. 16.1.4, the endorsement of the community recognition for our frontline workers. And this is moved by Councillor Hamlin and seconded by Councillor Berman. Whereas the town of Collingwood and community are conducting a number of tributes for all our frontline and essential service workers during the COVID-19 crisis, be it resolved that council herein endorse the various local and national tributes for our frontline workers, including the Shine a Light for All Doctors tribute scheduled for May 1st at 9 p.m. and the various dedicated days or weeks during the COVID-19 pandemic that celebrate and recognize all essential workers that have been busy working tirelessly and risking their safety for the safety and well-being of others. Any questions or comments, Council, before I call the vote? Councillor Hamlin?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are so many tributes and so on that are happening for our amazing frontline workers. I had originally brought this matter forward as a May 24th tribute, and then I realized all the other things that were going on. And of course, as you've read out the motion, the special one this week, which is brought forward by the Medical Association, the Shine a Light, which is shining a light has become the universal way of expressing gratitude for those leading the way out of crises. And that one this week is to recognize the frontline workers by coming out at 9 p.m., turning your light on your iPhone and saying thank you. So I just really wanted to have this endorsement brought forward and appreciate support. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Any other questions or comments, Council? Seeing none, I will call the vote then. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Item 16.1.5, I'm advised by the clerk that this is being deferred to the SIC meeting, which is on May 6th. So we'll be dealing with this item on May 6th, and that's the request for the 2021 commitment from Collingwood Re-Recruitment and Retention of Family Physicians, Blue Mountains Joint Municipal Physician Retention and Recruitment Committee. Is there any other business, Council? Yeah, Councillor Berman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. This is further to a conversation that you, myself, and Councillor Doherty had last week, and I think we've all spoken to Deputy Mayor Hull about it as well, and it was trying to find a way to possibly eliminate garage sales, yard sales, while we're still in this emergency time, because having, you know, a couple dozen tables out on a yard with 1,000 items that are all being touched by a small group of 20 or 30 people is obviously not a good thing to do. And I know that the couple municipalities I've read that have banned them, have banned yard sales, have been municipalities that also licensed them in the first place. So we don't do that. So I guess it's a different process. And I was just wondering if you could either comment if you know something, or look into it possibly to see if there's anything we could do about it. Because with this nice weather, I'd be surprised if I didn't see something starting as soon as this weekend.
It's a good initiative, Councillor Berman, and there has been discussion amongst staff. So I'll look to either CAO or Executive Director Skinner or the clerk to talk about this. I guess it is a bylaw issue, so I'll start with the clerk.
Certainly, through your worship, to members of council. When this was brought to my attention earlier today about the possibilities of dealing with it at the meeting today, we did reach out to Greg Miller, the CBO and responsible for bylaw enforcement, and their team has looked at it. We don't license them. They believe that this is something that they will continue to manage. And then in speaking with Executive Director Skinner today, responsible for communications, we felt it was something that through the communications perspective, and she might want to address this further, that we can include that in some of our communications about, you know, discouraging it at this point while we're looking at recovery.
Executive Director, do you want to add to that?
Thank you, Your Worship. There's not too much to add, just that I agree that the emergency orders and the health unit recommendations do give us some levers to approach anyone who might go forward with something like this, because certainly it's something that that should not happen, and we can support that through our communication with this as an example of the kind of things that residents might or should hold off on for now. And we all need to work together to get to the end of this. And we're so close to, we hope we're so close to getting to the end that we're going to ask everyone to hold on with those health recommendations until we do get there. Thank you.
Councillor Berman, does that answer your question?
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Councillor Doherty. Did you have your hand up? Looks like we might be having a technical issue with Councillor Doherty's. Oh, there you go. It looks like you're on.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. I did have a matter. I have received a letter from a resident in regard to parking on public boulevards. And this is an item that has come forward in the past, and there has been some discussion. Public boulevards, in addition to providing town engineering and roads with important rights of way and rights of access, also serve to absorb runoff. They beautify our community. They contribute to traffic calming, and they provide green space and a place for trees. In view of our intention to plant $500,000 worth of trees over the next 5 years, it seems to me that we are reducing available space on which to plant these trees on public lands. More recently, some communities, as an example, the City of Edmonton and the City of Aurora, have begun actually issuing landscaping permits for beautification of boulevards and even the installation of pollinator gardens. So with this in mind, and I realize that this is likely going to revolve around a request for a staff report, I would like to have us consider the matter of parking on boulevards and come forward with a recommendation from the clerk's office and bylaw enforcement. And if this would require a notice of motion, I'm happy to put that forward now or to bring that to the next meeting.
I think based on our policy, when we're getting a staff report, we are asking for, I guess, notice. I'm not sure it's a notice of motion. I'll look to the clerk for direction on this, but we have been giving a notice of the request in advance, not really a formal notice of motion, but then dealing with the request at the subsequent meeting. So I guess we will take that you've served us with notice that you'll be requesting the staff report in the upcoming at the next meeting.
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Worship.
Any other business, council? Councillor Doherty, or Councillor Jeffrey, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor Saunderson. I just wanted to get a brief update with respect to FCEM's work and some really key messages that all as municipal council members we need to be aware of, and to make sure that we always highlight and support them where we can. You would have seen the recent public request made to the federal government on behalf of municipalities for some operating emergency funding. And so as municipal leaders, we're working flat out to get our residents and Canadians through the pandemic. Things like turning arenas into shelters and deploying portable hygiene stations and deferring people's property taxes. There's all kinds of examples. But the pandemic has cities and communities heading toward a brink of financial crisis. Our costs are unrecoverable. So we're looking to the federal government for assistance through the emergency operating funds that have been requested. The ask for over the next 6 months, which has been calculated based on a lot of the great information that municipalities have supplied to FCM. The request is for 10 to 15 billion, which would cover the next 6 months based on the information that we know. And if there's anyone who's curious about that, for the town of Collingwood, it would mean, for any municipality, would mean 3.5 times what we usually receive from the gas tax fund. The proposal for 7.6 billion of the first 10 billion is just that, to be allocated to municipalities similar to the gas tax fund. And then the balance of That first 10 million, the 2.4, is targeted specifically to municipalities with transit because those costs are significant and a different calculation, and it would be based 100% on ridership. So any community that has transit would receive a blended rate between those two funds. And I think the biggest message is that we need the federal government to step in as direct partners with municipalities. We don't have time for the jurisdictional debate between feds and the province. And so I think those were the key highlights from it. It's a big ask. I think probably one of the biggest ones made in FCM's history, but these are, the word we use the most is these are unprecedented times. And today I had a conference call or Skype call with my rural forum colleagues, and we had a meeting with Minister Monsef of the Rural Economic Development portfolio. Also, she does gender equality, but we were speaking to her in terms of the rural economic development. And the town of Collingwood was used as an example in one of the pillars of the 4 key messages we were trying to highlight with the ministers. So FCM still hard at it, and their work is ongoing. So I have weekly conference calls with them on Wednesdays at 11, and the extra calls with ministers as they come up. So that is the information. The report from FCM has been downloaded in its entirety 1,500 times, I think, as of day 1 or day 2. And day 1, it reached probably pretty close to, I think it was 1.7 million hits. So quite a significant ask, attracting a lot of attention, and based on some stark realities in our municipalities Canada-wide. That's it.
Any questions for Councillor Jeffrey? Councillor Comey.
Thank you so much, Mayor Saunderson. Through you to Councillor Jeffrey, thank you for that update. I didn't realize you were on the online rural forum. And I apologize, obviously I didn't have a chance to talk to you about this in advance, so we can always circle back to another time. Rural broadband, were you part of that discussion today? Cellular connectivity, I think those are certainly very interesting topics to me. Were you able to share anything with us about that?
That is a significant topic for us nationally. It's particularly coming up in areas now that it's being proposed for children's education by broadband, so northern and remote and areas, quite frankly, in Simcoe County who don't have access to broadband. Their children are not being given equal opportunity to receiving that education. In the meantime, it was already, we'd already had an approved universal broadband ask of the federal government. So we made that again today to Minister Monsef to say that it's been accepted and approved and it should roll out immediately, because what was already a crack in our economic abilities pre-COVID has now been exacerbated beyond and becoming very challenging for municipalities. So that was a very, very big topic today of our discussion, for sure.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much.
And the county has been doing some work on that with the SWIFT network of the Southwestern Ontario fiber group. And we've been working away on that. So it's nice to get that shot in the arm, and hopefully that federal push will get it done for us. Councillor Hamlin.
Yes, I know that some of our own residents are either without internet or don't have unlimited internet, and it affects their ability to access services and their schoolwork for the children and so on. And I know that Director Culver's been working on creating some hotspots in our community. Are these, and this is through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Jeffrey, are these kind of initiatives ones that will cost municipalities funds, and is FCM looking for funding for this as well?
Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you. There are a lot of municipalities who are providing spaces, parking lot spaces for their residents, to even those who need to apply online for some of the help. If they don't have that ability in their home, they need access to internet to make those requests. And so basically, the way that we ask for these funds to be allocated gives the municipality the flexibility to spend it on the priorities they need to address their COVID challenges. So if that had a cost for the municipality, the emergency funds we hope that we would receive would help offset that. So basically the asks today were targeted to making sure broadband was available, and that the next stage would be last mile funding or internet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey, for all your hard work and chairing that committee. And it's an excellent report. I've read most of it, and 10 billion, I started to cross my eyes, but I hope the federal government will be very responsive to that, and that we'll start to see some of that funding flow to us. Any other business? Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One thing I've seen get a lot of discussion in print recently is the fact that the federal government will likely be looking to major infrastructure projects to help get our economy relaunched. And in a recent interview, our federal infrastructure minister, Catherine McKenna, she said that the ministers are now consulting with business leaders on economic recovery. And she said, and I'm just reading here, infrastructure will play a significant part with a focus on speeding up the rollout of the billions in existing federal funds that have been budgeted through to 2028, but not yet spent. So I don't think we need a motion. And I just really wanted to alert staff and council to this, because I think that those who are shovel ready are usually, it's a lot easier to get funds. And I know in our community, I had some discussions with Director Culver this week about the funds that are needed to rehabilitate and bring forward our lands at the end of the spit there on Heritage Way through around to Sunset Park, and whether that could be considered an infrastructure project. And of course, we all know the state of our roads, which I would personally love to see lots of money thrown at. So anyway, I just wanted to raise this so that we're not taken off guard, and we can all start thinking about the kind of projects that maybe we have almost ready to go in any event. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. I know the CAO has talked about having projects shovel ready to help jumpstart our economy locally. And now the funding, well, we hope that there will be stimulus funding. So I'll look to the CAO to comment.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. And I don't have much to add except to say that this has been on our mind since March the 13th, when we first approached Council to say we need to proceed with all of the tenders that we have in process, so that if and when we're ready to go, that we've got these shovel-ready projects. So that has been our sort of theme from day one. We also have a number of projects that were either put on hold or deferred as part of our pre-2020 budget deliberations. So I think it is fair to say that we've got a bank of capital projects that are shovel-ready. And they're ones that we're hoping that will be shovel ready in the next few months as we conclude some of the tender requirements that are in the work. So Councillor Hamlin's comments are quite timely. I did notice as well the comments by the federal infrastructure minister. And in addition to our local stimulus package, we can draw on a federal stimulus package. That'd be great. So appreciate the comments, and I think hopefully we'll be ready.
Thank you.
All right, any other business before I bring the motion to get us moved in camera? Seeing none, this motion is moved by Councillor Madigan and seconded by Councillor Berman. Whereas the clerk hereby concurs the reasons for the in-camera session have been duly reviewed and considered, and the matters are authorized under the exception provisions to conduct a closed session in accordance with the Municipal Act prior to proceeding into closed session. Therefore, be it resolved that this council proceeds in camera in order to address a matter pertaining to personal matters about an identifiable individual, including town or local board employees, items for discussion, appointment of committee members, accessibility, heritage, museum, B, review of the CAO position, and review of support services. Any questions or comments, council, before I call the vote? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. So we will now be moving in camera, and we will have a Horizon report. Right, I'll just confirm with the clerk, we're live streaming now, we're back up.
Through your worship, just one moment more. It's just
Okay,
loading,
all right.
maybe about 20 seconds or so.
Let us know when, Chris, thanks.
We're live again.
Good, thank you very much. All right, council, we'll look for a motion to rise from in camera. It's moved by Councillor Doherty and seconded by Councillor Jeffrey. Be it resolved that council rise from in camera and return to public session at 7:57 p.m. I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Next item is be it moved by Councillor Berman, seconded by Councillor Hamlin. Be it resolved that bylaw number 2020-27 being a bylaw to appoint a chief administrator officer be enacted and passed this 27th day of April 2020. And to be clear, the chief administrative officer that we are appointing is Executive Director Sonia Skinner, who will now become our acting CAO. Any questions or comments, council, before I call the vote? I have a comment. Part of this bylaw is to repeal the appointment of our current CAO, Fareed Amin, and I want to thank Fareed for his 2.5+ years of service to this council and our town. It has been a pleasure to work with Fareed. He is a man of impeccable professionalism. The advice he has given us has been extraordinary, particularly in these times that we find ourselves today. And we wish him the very best in his future endeavors. And thank you, Fareed. I also want to say that while it's hard to say goodbye to Fareed, it's also exciting to be saying hi to our new, well, not hi, she's been our executive director now for approximately 8 months. She is a person of incredible talents, and we look forward to working with her in the next 6 months as our acting CAO, and we have our work cut out for us. And I'm quite confident that Sonia is going to lead us very capably as we work through this COVID crisis and work to assist our residents in surviving the crisis and getting back up to speed. So welcome, Sonia. So with all that being said, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And the last item for business tonight is a resolution moved by Councillor Jeffrey, seconded by Councillor Doherty. Be it resolved that council rescind resolution 49-2020 that reads as follows. The council herein retain the services of Fareed Amin on a part-time basis on terms to be negotiated with the assistance of the HR manager. And further, that council support the CAO, that's our CAO Sonia Skinner, to retain the services of Fareed Amin on an as-needed basis under terms negotiated between the CAO and Mr. Min with the assistance of the HR manager. And if there are no questions or comments, council, I'm going to call the vote. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And this brings us to our final piece motion tonight. Oh, I'm sorry. Sarah, have I missed some stuff with respect to confirming the appointments? I've got some motions here, but I don't see them on the agenda, so. Oh, sorry, I do have them. So we're looking at, this is bylaw number 2029. So it's moved by Councillor McLeod and seconded by Councillor Comey. Be it resolved, the bylaw number 2029 being a bylaw to appoint members to the Accessibility Advisory Committee be enacted and passed this 27th day of April 2020. I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Next is bylaw number 2020-30, and it's moved by Councillor McLeod and seconded by Councillor Comey. Be it resolved, the bylaw number 2020-30 being a bylaw to appoint members to the Museum Advisory Committee be enacted and passed this 27th day of April 2020. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Next appointment bylaw is moved by Councillor Doherty and seconded by Councillor Hamlin. Be it resolved, the bylaw number 2020-31 being a bylaw to appoint members to the Collingwood Heritage Committee be enacted and passed this 27th day of April 2020. All in favor? That is carried. Councillor Berman, good, got it. Thank you. And the last piece tonight is the confirmatory bylaw, and it is moved by Councillor Hammond and seconded by Councillor Berman. Be it resolved that bylaw number 2020-28 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the regular meeting of council held April 27, 2020 be enacted and passed this 27th day of April 2020. All in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been a very busy night, and all we need now is the motion to adjourn, right, Councillor Jeffrey? Thank you. All in favor? Good night, everyone. Thank you very much.